Well, happy Wednesday. It is July 1st, and God willing, the last week that we're not meeting in person together. Next week, July 8th, we will be meeting behind the Terra building and having our service back there, which is going to be great. We miss you guys. Tonight and next week, we'll be continuing the series that we've been in since the beginning of quarantine, and that is on following Jesus. You guys haven't heard me say this for a little while, but remember, the reason we have CSM at all is to create a culture of worship, belonging, and growth. And the reason we pick those three is because worship is the best relationship we can have with God, belonging with each other, and growth with ourselves, right? That's the most loving expression in those relationships. And we get that idea from the Great Commandment to love God with all heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love neighbor as self. And so we believe those values are the public expressions of that commandment, right? And so the way that we do this, the way that we fulfill that commandment, and the way that we grow that culture is by engaging with Jesus in a framework of apprenticeship or discipleship. That's the most worshipful thing we can do, to really be a student of who God actually is. It's also the most loving thing we can do for each other. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have conflicts, but it means that we've got the humility, the framework for dealing with conflicts, with community support. That's going to be good for relationships. And finally, obviously, that's growth. I mean, to be a student of Jesus is to grow. And so the reason we want to do this, the reason we want to be students of Jesus, is for that end goal of Ephesians chapter 3, 14 through 21, where Paul talks about coming together, all the saints, to know how big and wide and deep the love of God is, so that we can know that love that is surpasses knowledge, so that we can be filled to all the fullness of God, right? That right there is the most loving thing we can do for God, neighbor, and self. And so far in this series, we've talked about how there's basically three major steps in discipleship to Jesus. One would be to follow the one that he followed while on earth. This is the Holy Spirit. And so you could even say that being a student of Jesus is for the sake of doing a better job, being more proficient at keeping in step with the Spirit. And then secondly, this results from being led by the Holy Spirit, but we need to develop the virtues that Jesus had. He was more patient and kind than we are. He doesn't envy. Jesus doesn't boast. He's not proud, right? These are all the things 1 Corinthians 13 lists. And if we want to be with Jesus, we're going to have to let go of those opposites that we've held on to. It's going to be easier for us to hang out with the patient and kind Jesus if we can let go of our meanness and impatience, right? There'll be less friction. And then finally, to be a student of Jesus is to learn to do everything as he would in our position. There is a way that he would budget, a way that he would exercise, that he changes oil, all these different things. And so we want to finally get to the point where we are able to do those things, right? So last week we talked about how love isn't self-seeking or me first. Love is God first. Tonight we're going to talk about how love is not easily angered, and instead how it works to achieve peace. Love is a peacemaker. Now, there's a whole bunch of nuance that needs to be given to this particular topic tonight. One is that it's not saying that love is never angry, right? God is love, right? And God has been angry, right? Jesus got angry. And Dallas Willard would say, don't use that as an excuse to be angry all the time, because he says, there's just plenty of things that I can trust Jesus with that I can't trust you with. And one of the points I want to make tonight is that even though anger is often justified, the danger of anger is that it always feels justified, whether it is or isn't. And secondly, our anger, even when it is justified, can be more destructive than to us. Our own anger can be more destructive to us than the original injury that caused us to be angry in the first place, and can totally mess up our mental clarity and desire to actually make things peaceful, like actually flourishing, right? So that's one thing. Paul says, in your anger, do not sin, right? And so that contrast means that it's not a sin to be angry, right? But it increases the chances that sin will be there, right? It's really hard not to sin when you are angry. But the right solution isn't to suppress anger, the right solution is to go to God with your anger, and seek his guidance with it, okay? Dallas Willard says that everything that can be done with anger can be done better without it. Now, what's funny is often when I say that statement, it makes people angry because, again, anger is justified, but it's often justified, but even when it isn't, it feels like it. And I know this, like anytime someone sounds like they're trying to invalidate someone's feelings, it makes them angrier. And so I'm not trying to do that at all. I'm trying to get to the point where I can say anger is justified. Often we certainly want to be able to feel it than to not be able to feel it at all. Leprosy, as we talked about in our former messages, isn't good because you can't feel things that are dangerous to you. And so the goal isn't to never feel anger. The goal is to have a process for dealing with it quickly so that we don't remain in that anger. One writer says that pain that is not transformed will eventually be transmitted. And anger is a type of pain, and sometimes is a clue to a deeper pain within us, okay? So I'm not talking about never being angry. I'm talking about it being less easy to slow down the anger, right? There's a few reasons why I think in our culture it's probably easier to be angry than it is in other ones, okay? One, I've talked about this to the guys. I don't know if this is true at all for the ladies, if this is consistent with your experience. It is with mine. But I said this a while ago when we were in our emotions series, but there's 5 universal human emotions of anger, fear, sadness, disgust, and enjoyment. And in some circles, the only emotion that is considered masculine and possibly even American to express is anger. So tough guys certainly don't want to admit they're afraid, certainly don't want to admit sadness. Disgust has to do with fear, so it's vulnerable. You don't want to do that. In some circles, even admitting enjoyment can be seen as too vulnerable, right? In the example of the Spartans, they saw enjoyment as weakness or leading to it, and so they would eat this disgusting food. They would literally try to keep their lives as unenjoyable as possible, so they'd be fantastic warriors. Now, there's a saying that when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And when anger is the only emotion that a young man feels is appropriate or masculine or powerful to express, it's going to cause a tremendous amount of damage in his life and in other people's lives. But it's just such a stupid way of living, right? And so we need to keep in mind, being a student of Jesus means that we don't want to just do what he would do. We want to feel the way that he would feel about everything. And we want to not just feel the way he feels. I want to look at a dollar bill the way Jesus would, and valuing it no more or no less than he would, and for the reason he would. And when I see human beings, I want to feel exactly the same way as he would about those people, which is going to be emotionally complex, right? There could be fear, anger, sadness, all this other stuff, but with this incredible desire for their redemption. And so if we're going to be students of Jesus, Jesus is our model, and young men, listen to me, Jesus is the appropriate masculine model in your life, right? I don't care who else is out there. They got nothing on Jesus, okay? And Jesus wept when it was time to weep. And he enjoyed things when it was time to. And and he was angry at certain times, but like Willard said, we can trust his anger more than we can trust our own. And so I want us to be wise about this. Another major reason why I think Americans are more tempted to be angry is, from the social pressure that we have. One, we live in a competitive environment, which can be fun. You can totally compete in a way that doesn't produce anger, but in a lot of places that's really what is used to get people's attention. So one of my favorite things about being a dad, in addition to loving my kids, is I get to do fun stuff, right? And so me and Ricky play with Legos and cars all the time, all that, go in the woods. Everything is new to him, and so it's a lot of fun. But I get to watch his movies too. So Monsters, Inc. is this fantastic movie where the idea is that this whole society has built their energy source around scaring kids, right? That's how the monsters power their city. And so working for the electric company for them is going and scaring kids, capturing that energy, bringing it back. Long story short, they figure out near the end of the movie that making a kid laugh is like 10 times as powerful as scaring them. And so they replace the method of just scaring kids with going and doing stand-up comedy, getting all the laughs, empowering their city that way, okay? Now, I think that we live in a culture very much like that, where the media, social, and I'm not dismissing journalism, it's such an important job, no question, but we know that a lot of news organizations have gotten ratings by scaring people, right? If it leads, it bleeds, or if it bleeds, it leads, is what they say. Anything sensational. And these days, I think possibly even more than the past, social media influencers and different news channels, whatever, the product is anger to get your attention. And so we are encouraged to live in a constant state of anger. Now, again, there are things to be angry about, no question. There are injustices that need to be corrected. There's problems that need to be corrected. But for that to be our source of energy is very, very short-sighted. It's like sugar versus something that can give us way more endurance. The value of anger is that it draws our attention to a problem, might even get us moving. But to actually be constructive, to actually make peace, we're gonna need something more than anger. And I'll get to